back to another episode of the Agronomy Answers Podcast. We have Heidi from our seed lab joining us again to talk about some of the tests that are run in the seed lab and how they translate to the farm. Thanks for joining us, Heidi. What are different tests? I mean, when you talk about tests in the seed lab, obviously there's a lot of them.
Right.
What are the main? What's like the main test that's normally run?
So the biggest thing is the purity and the germ, because that's what we label on. So those are the ones that were required by the Federal Seed Act to do the tests on. And then we also do some stress tests on each of them too, and then a trait purity on each corn and soybeans also.
So when you're starting with the purity, we were up in the seed lab looking around.
Yeah.
So you're basically dumping seeds into this machine to test for different colors to like sort out.
Yeah,
them?
so on the corn, we have the rib corn, right? The
Yeah.
refuge in a bag.
Yeah.
And so we have green seed and purple seed. And because it's more than 5%, that's the minimum required. So more than 5% of our blended seed is refuge. We have to test those two germs separately. And so we have a color sorter, a little robot that sorts out the purple from the green, and then we test those two for germs separately. So like if you're looking at a seed tag, there's a major germ score and a refuge germ score. And that's why there's two on there, is because we're testing those two separately.
And then so after you sort them out, then you bring them into like you put them onto trays, and then you're trying to get basically all the foreign material off.
Yeah.
That's what's next.
Yep, so we have a screen, that little pan with a screen that we shake them through, and we'll do a 500-gram sample for each corn and soybeans. Different species have different minimum weights that we have to do a purity on, and we'll shake out any foreign material and get a percentage for inert matter, any weed seed or other crop seed that might be contaminating it, and so we'll report that, and then that's also on the tag. That it'll say, 99.67% pure seed and 0.23 of foreign or inert matter or whatever that might be. So
Yeah.
Yep.
And then it gets to the most talked about part, the warm germ and the cold germ test.
Yeah.
What temperatures are those run at?
So the warm germ is very much optimal conditions, and that's one thing important to remember too, is that is the best conditions we can possibly expose that seed to. And so it is good moisture, 24-hour light for 7 days, and it's at 77 degrees Fahrenheit, 25 degrees Celsius. And so that one is the best conditions that you could possibly ever dream up to have in your field. And then, so that's why we also do the stress test on it. And so then at the end of that 7 days on the germ, then we're counting how many seeds have emerged and any abnormals, things like that the leaf is kind of shredded out or not a strong root or things like that we want to pick out, and we'll count those as abnormals, and then we count any dead seeds also.
Yeah, those tests are very controversial a little bit because they only show the warm germ on your seed tag,
Right.
but it's running 77 degrees, and we don't plant
Absolutely
in
not.
77 degree soil.
Right.
So then we want to also do this cold germ test, which
Yep.
talk about what happens with the cold germ test.
Yeah, so on the cold germ test, something that Hefty does that is not really industry standard. Industry standard cold test is 50 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days, and then into the warm, that 77, for 4 days. And at Hefty, we're doing 40 series because we sell as 40, and so we're doing a 40-degree test for our cold test. And so we'll plant that seed onto a tray with our testing media, and so that's a VersaPack is what it's called. It's a specialized germ towel that holds in the moisture, and then we'll cover those seeds with sand. We put them in the 40 degrees germinator for 7 days, and then we move them into that warm and let them emerge. And so we're simulating with that. If you plant early, everybody wants to plant early, and so we're simulating that early planting in the cold soil, and then when we move it into the warm, that sand slowly warms up just the same as your soil does. And so it's simulating that, is it going to come out of that kind of hibernation that it goes into? in the 40 degrees.
Because sometimes you could see in the warm germ where it's got 95% warm germ, but then if you put it in a cold germ, it might not have as good of a score.
Right.
And that's what you're basically trying to figure out.
Yeah, we're seeing how many seeds will survive that cold soil, that cold shock at the beginning when we're planting them.
And you're doing both, though. If you're doing a cold germ, you're already doing a warm germ on it. So you see the warm germ score and the cold germ score.
Yep. We're doing a germ on everything. We're required by law to do a germ on everything. And then that cold is kind of a supplemental, I guess, but that it's an optional test, but we do it on everything. And so we run all of those tests side by side. And that's also, it's kind of a cool, like, checks and balances, too, where if for some reason we have our cold test higher than our germ, then we got to figure out something went wrong during the test or whatever. And so then we'll retest both usually if something wonky happens in between the two.
Yeah, and it's not saying that if it doesn't get 95% in cold germ doesn't mean that it's not a good seed. It just means that it might not be something you would want to plant at 40 degrees.
Right. And so that's, I think, why that cold test is so important, is because it just give you that when to plant. And that's why it's important to do both of the tests, too, because then, I mean, you don't want to dump a whole bunch of seed that, you have sitting around or whatever. You don't want to dump a bunch of seed based on the cold test. And then if you would have planted it 3 weeks later, it would have been fine. And so that's why we do both tests.
Yeah. And when I was up in the seed lab, you could see we did a little bit different on the soybeans versus the corn, because the corn was just kind of on the trays. And then the soybeans have sand as well. So why is it not the same? Like, why is it not the same, basically?
So we are allowed to do, by our rules, both are approved methods with and without sand. But we do the sand on the soybeans just because the soybeans are more apt to have, with that thinner seed coat, they're more apt to have, like, fungal growth and things like that when we're putting them in that super warm, fantastic conditions. It's great for growing the seed, but it's also great for growing fungus. And so that's more just for our ease of eval. But then we also can see that the emergence kind of in that too, with the sand of, is the soybean going to be strong enough to pop through that sand? Yeah,
because it's got to push through it a little bit because it's kind of packed. The sand's kind of packed in, and then you can see, like, and a couple days in when they're all trying to, like, push out.
Yeah, you can just kind of see it break. Yeah. I mean, same as in your field conditions. Yeah. In the field you can see that too.
So what other tests are run on soybeans? Because there's one other test that I think it's just run on soybeans, right? The accelerated aging test.
Yep.
So what is that?
Yep. So you can do it on corn, but it never usually turns out well. So it's not industry standard to do it on corn. But we do the accelerated aging test is kind of to simulate if you have soybeans left over and you leave them through a hot, humid summer sitting in your bin, are they going to age well and be able to grow still the next year? And we can translate it a little into field conditions just because it's testing the vigor and the strength of the seed. And so we can transition it a little bit into what this year's field conditions are going to be too. But for the most part, it's just testing the longevity of the seed. And so with that test, we put them into, like, a little box on a screen with water in the bottom of it. And it's a certain weight of seed and certain milliliters of water. And it's all, figured out scientifically by people way smarter than me. I just follow the process. But then we put them so they're sealed into this little container, and we put them into a chamber that is an incubator chamber that's 100% humidity. And it's set at 41 degrees Celsius, which is about 104, 105 Fahrenheit. And we put them in there for 3 days, and we basically just cook them. And we speed up that process of if they were sitting in the bin all summer.
And you're doing that with new seeds, too.
Yep.
Yeah, that's just like almost like a standard test,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah. It's kind of the soybean version of what we do with the cold on the corn. It's just to stress that seed as much as we possibly can and see if it's going to grow through those conditions.
So with kind of all of these tests, they're done in a lab. Mm-hmm. And if you were, like, kind of skeptical on if they would translate to the field, what's been your experience on when you get a germ score in the lab, whether it's warm or cold, how well does that translate out into the field?
It does for the most part, but there's always, different compaction problems and things like that in a field that it's not 100%. If we say it's a 95, it's probably, I mean, that's the minimum that it's probably going to be, but there's always, environmental issues. You can never count on Mother Nature to make everything perfect. And that's why it's important to remember with those germs that we are doing then at optimal conditions. The abnormals is kind of the biggest thing that we take away from our testing in-house, which is kind of the cool thing about working for such a small lab and a small company where I'm working with kind of our production team and with the agronomists, where we can troubleshoot some of the problems. And if there is a problem in the field, then the agronomist can bring it back to me and we can look at what that was, of how many abnormals were on there, what were the different abnormals, of did it have an emergence problem and things like that. So we can kind of translate and problem solve what the issue might have been. And so it translates more, I feel like, in that way. But yeah, for the most part, if you look at what a 95% germ is, it's probably going to be pretty close to that in the field. And especially when we get into those stress tests, that's a really important thing to ask your agronomist what those tests were, because it's not on the tag just to keep things universal, but we do test those stress tests on everything here.
So when you're running some of these different tests, what is a point where, okay, this lot or this seed number needs to be flagged for something, or we're not going to sell this seed? What, is there a level where it's like, okay, we got to retest this because this is not doing too well?
Yeah, we do have thresholds set that are, and some of them will kind of vary based on if it's new seed or carryover seed, because you expect the older seed to kind of fall out a little bit. And so there are different levels of those thresholds. But on the corn, anything below a 95% germ, we're not selling. And anything below a 90 on soybeans, we're not selling. And then on those vigor tests, I think they set it to an 85 for both soybean AA and a cold germ, that if they're lower than that, then we just can't count on them. We just can't trust that they're going to do what they need to do in the field. And so those are kind of our bottom thresholds where we're not selling them. But kind of anywhere, anything with a lot of abs, where that would be where it's kind of on a case-by-case basis of the ones that we've germed look really good, the ones that germinated, but then there's a bunch of dead. So what's the deal here? Or there's a lot of abnormals, so then we're looking into what's the mechanical damage maybe, or things like that. Are there a bunch of broken seeds that we can clean out, or things like that too?
So basically you're saying is only the good seeds are the ones that are getting sold.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, if once they start to fall out, we're not going to sell them. We definitely want our seed to be the best. We want to be selling the best. And so that's where I feel like sometimes we're almost harsher on them, because we want to make sure that not only are they germing good, but do they look good too? Because you want, good uniform growth and things like that. That's something that we're looking at too. And so we just want our seed to be the best. And so that's what we're selling.
Yeah, and so that's why we're doing all these different tests.
Yeah.
Basically just to prove that.
Right, yeah.
In the lab. It's just to prove the quality of it. And if it's not, then getting rid of it, basically.
Right, out the door.
So is there any other test that I missed that you run, or is that all of them right there?
Another one that we're doing is we do a trait bioassay. And so that is for the herbicide traits that any of these seeds have, that we have the Extend Flex that is approved for using Roundup and Liberty and dicamba on. And so we're testing with those herbicides to be sure that those traits really are in there and strong traits. And so we'll soak our testing media, we'll soak with a mixture approved by the herbicide, the trait owner companies, that is a set ratio of herbicide to water, and we'll soak the towels in that and then plant the seed onto that. And so then they have that contact as they're imbibing. And so then they'll grow through, and we make sure we're verifying that it does have that trait. So if you go out and spray Roundup on that field, you're not going to kill all your soybeans.
And then we know at least. So
Yes.
it's just a...
Yeah.
And so if it doesn't get mixed up,
Right.
it's the right one.
Yeah. There have definitely been times where either the wrong tests have been ordered or it's been labeled, and the sample got labeled with the wrong lot or something like that. And then we plant one and it's like, oh, these are all non-trait. That's a problem.
So if growers were wondering why this seed lab matters for seed quality, why it's important that seeds coming out of this lab that are tested, that they're going to reach quality, what's one thing to remember with the seed testing process for growers, how they can trust it?
Yeah, I think that, I guess something that we kind of face as an independent lab is there might be that question that farmers might have of, well, are you just upping the scores because you want your seed to look better? And we send, for every 10 to 15 tests that we do, we will send to a third-party lab. We'll send a sample. And so we're verifying the proficiency of us as analysts as well. And so you can trust our results because we are testing with those standardized rules that we're required to follow per the Federal Seed Act, and we're verifying it with a third-party lab and checking our proficiency, which is also something that we have to do in order to keep our certifications and keep our title as registered seed technologist. We have to do proficiency testing at least twice a year, but we're going above and beyond that in our lab and sending samples to a third-party lab to confirm our results too.
Yeah, so there's a lot of cross-checking and just making sure that what you guys are saying is the same as them.
Right.
And basically just a third-party lab just sending it in the samples, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and just because we want everybody to have complete confidence in us, that we're doing everything the way that it needs to be done and that we can have trustworthy results.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different tests that are run. And how many samples are you running, like, per day or per year, I guess, right now?
It just kind of depends on the year. I mean, in the 4 years that I've been here, I feel like we have almost doubled our test numbers every year. Last year, we did just over 10,000 tests. And each sample will have 2 to 4 tests on it, just depending on what traits it has and things like that. And so we probably 2,000-3,000 seeds, or samples. Every single lot that we sell has been tested. Most of them multiple times. Like with the soybeans, we're doing a harvest test, and then we'll do a clean test. And then if it gets treated, then we're testing it again to make sure that we're not doing damage during the treating process or things like that too. So yeah, everything a lot. It's a lot of tests.
All the seeds are getting vigorously tested.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, this has been great stuff, Heidi. Thanks so much for telling us a little bit about what's going on in the Seed Lab.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Agronomy Answers Podcast. Make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.